Crop Talk on Market Journal is supported by Nebraska's soybean farmers and their checkoff.
Finally today, before we know it, the 2023 growing season will be here. There are a number of pests that are capable of causing commotion in your crops. Soybean stem borer is becoming one of those, becoming more widespread as well across Nebraska's soybean fields. Last month, Nebraska Extension entomologist Bob Wright spoke at the 2023 Soybean Day and Machinery Expo to discuss whether insecticides are an effective management practice. We were fortunate enough to have Bob join us in the studio for this week's Crop Talk. Well, let's talk about soybean stem borer. What is it?
It's a small beetle. It's called a longhorn beetle. It has long antennae. It's light gray. Has one generation a year. And what the issue is, we're seeing historically, it's a Native American insect. It feeds on sunflowers and related plants such as cockleburr and ragweed and wild sunflower. But in the 1980s, in several parts of the U.S., it expanded its host range to include soybeans. So we started seeing this as a problem in Kansas in most of the 80s and 90s. And then it slowly has been moving up north. We first saw it in soybeans in Nebraska in 2000, right along Highway 81 across the border. And the last 20 years or so, it's been moving further north and east and west from that point. And it's continuing to move into new areas. I know it's north of the Platte River in some areas, not every field, but it's something soybean growers should be watching for.
Let me ask you more about its spread. How is it spreading and how quickly does that happen? You mentioned over the past 20 years we've seen that expand in the state of Nebraska.
Well, it's just the adult beetle can fly, and that's the main way it spreads. So it's slow, not really long flyers, but they can easily fly a mile or two. Yeah.
Expanding quite a bit across the country, I assume, then too?
In pockets. Again, there were 3 different pockets on the East Coast and the Tennessee Valley and Kansas and Oklahoma where it started showing up on soybeans. And so those are there are 3 areas that still have problems in soybeans, and that's been expanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, what kind of damage can this do for a soybean crop?
Well, the damage is done by the immature stage, which bores. Initially, the eggs are laid on the upper part of the canopy on the leaf petioles. Larvae feed in the leaf petiole, and then as they get larger, they bore into the main stem and tunnel up and down in the pith. And by the end of the season, they're at the base of the stem. And to prepare for overwintering, they cut out a cavity at the base of the stem, and that weakens the stem at that point. And if we have the right weather conditions, we can get stem breakage, and that can interfere with harvest. So that's the main issue, is the potential for harvest losses. There is some data that in certain circumstances we can get yield loss even without stem breakage, but that's relatively rare, a relatively small factor. The main factor is watching for potential harvest losses. If we get a lot of wind at the end of the season, we can get a lot of stem breakage, and that can make it hard for growers to harvest the soybeans.
Well, here's the big question. Are there mitigation strategies out there available for producers if they've got this in their fields?
Yeah, a couple of things. Trying to avoid or control the alternate hosts, like I talked about, ragweed or cockleburr or wild sunflowers, in particularly field borders, or if you have a field that isn't in production or an area that has a lot of weeds, that can contribute to problems. Some of the other factors are not maybe practical. Tillage has been shown we can bury the infested stem with soil. That can reduce the overwintering survival, but that's not really practical in a lot of areas. Rotation can help if you don't have a lot of soybeans in the area, but they can easily fly. A lot of areas in Nebraska with corn-soybean rotations, they merge in corn and move to the next door soybean field, so that doesn't really help a whole lot. We've done a lot of looking with insecticides. One of the challenges is the beetles lay eggs for over 3 to 4 weeks during the summer, so any one treatment is not going to control a large percentage of the population. And there's been quite a few studies with that, and it probably isn't going to pay to treat with an insecticide. You'd have to treat at least twice and maybe more, and still we could get infestation with the larvae.
Let me ask you this, as we're gearing up for the next growing season and people are out scouting their fields, is it something you can spot with the naked eye?
Well, what we see is when the larva moves out of the leaf petiole and into the stem, that leaf dries up and dies. And typically, at least in south central Nebraska, by mid-August we can start seeing, if you start seeing some dead leaves in the middle of the canopy, check those, and the base of the petiole you should be able to see where there was a tunnel from the larvae. So that's a good time to check and see what level of infestation you have, and if you have a high level, try to target those fields to harvest first to avoid harvest losses. That's probably the best benefit right now. Insecticides, we don't really recommend them. It's hard to time them right to get adequate control, and it may not increase profit.